happy to meet you here, friend of the Mikhailivsky Church, in the city center of Kyiv today. Thank you for finding this time, for sacrificing this evening to have this interview about your work in Ukraine with your team.
Sure.
So, Mike, can you please briefly give us your background in medicine, in training? Like, what have you been doing in the United States?
Prior to this?
Yeah, prior to your missions.
Yeah, sure. So back home, I'm a paramedic, and I work in basically outside the city of Boulder in Colorado. And before that, I used to work for the U.S. government, and I did that from 2002 till 2018 in a very different capacity. But within that role, I did a number of deployments, predominantly to Iraq and Afghanistan, starting in 2004. So I saw, while I wasn't a medic at that time, I was there for a lot of our evolution of medicine, our combat medicine, as we went through our war. I had the opportunity to come out to Ukraine in April of 2022, so early when the war started, and saw how different your conflict was from our most recent conflicts. And so one of the things that we have tried to do with our training is make sure that our training reflects your reality.
Yeah, and what were your expectations before your first time that you visited Ukraine? I mean, it's probably was not the same feelings that you've got when you came to Ukraine, actually. So what were your expectations? Like, I will go there to Ukraine. When was it for the first time? And did it met the expectations where you came here?
So first off, not at all. Ukraine has exceeded all of my expectations. And I think part of the problem was when we look at Ukraine from the U.S., we see a U.S. perspective. And so we're informed by what we see on the news or what we hear. And so for me, when I first came across, all I knew, I didn't know the size of Ukraine. I didn't know how really far at that time the fighting was. So April of 2022, after the initial invasion and Ukraine had pushed a lot of Russian troops back, I didn't understand any of those dynamics, right? It just felt like all of Ukraine was very dangerous and that there were missiles all the time. And even if we were still at that time west of Kyiv, we never made it farther than Vinnytsia on our first trip. But the organization we were with just made us feel like everything was so dangerous. It was so scary to be here. And again, we were taking that US model of some of our combat theaters and applying it to Ukraine. And we very quickly realized that it's very different. You know, for the most part, Ukrainians are very welcoming. They want us to be here, which is unlike some of our other experiences in other places we've been. Incredibly hospitable, incredibly kind, and deeply passionate about the future of Ukraine. You know, there's a community sense of desire for independence, desire for their ability to make your own decisions here as a united and free country. And that's very different than a lot of the places we've been. And so in every way, Ukraine exceeded my expectations. It's more beautiful. The people are just so much more incredible than I would have ever was led to believe coming in.
And what was the first time you came to Ukraine? When was it?
Yeah, so we came mid-April of 2022, so about 6-7 weeks after the initial invasion.
And what is your mission here in Ukraine? If briefly described for this intro, your mission as you personally, why you are here, and for your group, probably it somehow matches.
It totally matches. So we founded Força Ukraine, which is a subset of the Força Foundation, specifically to address what we saw as a need for continued advanced pre-hospital trauma training. So there were a lot of organizations training hemorrhage control, the basics of stopping the bleeding. But especially after the war entered its second year, a lot of people left. And we saw that there was still a huge gap in the ability for pre-hospital providers to get good advanced pre-hospital trauma care, especially contextually appropriate for the types of injuries you're seeing here.
And that pre-hospital care is mostly focuses on like military casualties, right?
Well, while it focuses on military casualties, we know for a fact that Ukraine is one of the most mined, if not most mined, countries in the world. We also know, as you know, there are air raids, there are missile strikes in urban centers. There was just a strike in the market in Kherson. We've been around other missile strikes. So while the preponderance of the fighting is happening out east, pre-hospital and hospital providers across Ukraine are seeing combat-like wounds because of the missile strikes, the artillery, all of those things that are being targeted on civilian populations.
And this is your fifth time?
This is our fifth time, yeah.
So, I know something about the group. I keep track of it.
Yeah.
So, how did your perspective of the structure of what you're doing here, of how your trainings, your activities here are built, did it change throughout the course of this separate iterations of your trips?
Very much so. So initially, our first two trips, we were with a bigger organization, and they had a lot of overhead structure. And so one of their limitations was we weren't allowed to go within 50 miles of the border or any of the fighting. And the other expectation was that we teach pre-hospital trauma training in a hospital environment. And we just know that that's not the most effective way to do it. If you're going to train trauma, you need to be closer to the trauma. So when we founded our own organization, one of the things that we felt strongly about was as long as the team felt comfortable, we were going to use an expeditionary model to basically go to the places where the needs were the highest and the opportunities for training were the lowest. Because one of the things that we've found is once medics get trained, for example, they go out to their position or go out to their basic area of operation, and for many of them, they never get a chance to come back. You know, the pace of the war is very fast. They don't have the ability, there might be only one or two medics, so the unit doesn't want to pull them away from their actual unit to come and get refresher training. And so for these trainings that are available in like Kiev, where we are now, or in Dnipro, it's very hard for those medics to come away from where their position is. So the one thing we've done is focused very much on going to where they are. And then the other thing, and this is critically important, is the Ukrainian experience is what is really, is what's kind of changing our training. So we come with a background in TCCC, combat medicine, or again, shaped by helicopter evac and fire superiority and a lot of the things that don't exist here. So how do we pull out best practice medicine? Because there is very good medicine in that, but make it more applicable to what's happening here in Ukraine. So every time we come out, we learn more and more about how to refine that. And that's because we're learning from Ukrainian medics, other Ukrainian medical providers, the truth of this, and that's what really helps us reshape and refine our training to make it as good as possible.
And throughout these missions that you had in Ukraine, I guess your team also was growing, like it was changing, new people came, and could you please also elaborate on your current team?
Sure.
What are those? Who are those people?
Yeah.
What is your structure of the team, and how you operate?
Yeah.
How it is all organized.
So we're really, really lucky. Our initial group was very, very strong. It was 2 paramedic firefighters from the U.S., one of whom was a 68 Whiskey, so a combat medic for us, who had a year of helicopter experience in Afghanistan. We have a dual board certified emergency medicine and family practice doctor from the U.S. who is also a professor of emergency medicine. And then my background is a paramedic, and then with my other experience with my work. So that was the original 4 U.S. members, and then we were joined by 3 just incredible Ukrainian, initially interpreters, but they've continued to evolve their own skill set, and they've become trainers in their own right. That was our first mission. That was July of 2023. And then that was basically the same team that we used for our second mission in March of 2024. We brought in a new interpreter who is also a Stop the Bleed instructor and just a fantastic trainer in her own right. And then on this trip, we knew that 2 of our team members were not going to be able to be here. And so we've had to reset and change. We've invited a new person into the team, actually 2 new people. The one that we're really happy about is Dr. Susanna. She's a Ukrainian doctor, anesthesiologist from Kharkiv, and the strength that she brings to our team is that she understands the Ukrainian education system as well as the medical side. So when she teaches and trains, she's able to help us fill in some of those gaps that we just take to be self-evident based on the American system. The other person that we brought out is a critical care paramedic whose system runs whole blood, and so he's very, very versed on how blood in the field works, which is a critical aspect, as you know, of trauma medicine. One of the challenges that we always have with our team, with adding new people, is because we use that expeditionary model, it's not always very comfortable for people. You know, we stay usually in one room or a home when we're very far forward. We try and have very low impact on anybody there. So we live communally, we try and live very simply, and consequently we live very close together. And as you know, that's not for everybody. So as we add new people, the most important thing that we do is make sure that they're a good teammate. We can teach the medicine, but we need good teammates. And then the other piece, and you got a chance to witness this and be part of it, and I'm really happy for that, is we're also building new U.S. partnerships that have new opportunities. And so, like when you and I worked together in August, that was a different partnership, but it allowed us to bring you and Fedir in as, you know, again, for the language capability, but specifically for the medical language capability because of your experience in the medical system and your own credentials. And I hope that as we move forward, we have more opportunities to work with people like you and bring in that Ukrainian perspective, because ultimately that's what needs to happen here.
Let's speak about your activities that you've done more. So we will have before we dive into the trainings agenda, what is the structure, what are the internals, let's speak about the perspective of these trainings. How many trainings have you had? I know that it's hard to come up with a precise number, but like generally it's how many groups, how many beneficiaries of these trainings have you had?
So I'd like to talk about the last 3 trips, because those have really been the Força trips. Each one of those is about a month long. So within that, the first time we trained about 750 people, but it was a mix of advanced medicine, but also very basic tourniquet application, wound packing. And we kind of went back and revisited that model later, and we've tried to refine it down. So on the last trip, we trained about 350 people in much more advanced medicine. And then on this trip, we try and spend about 3 to 5 days with people to make sure that we get a good, not just training, but then a replication of training over a couple of days. And so in doing that, on this trip, we've had about 10 different groups in 5 different geographic areas, each group between about 3 to 5 days.
All right. And what is your, you said the topics that you've started and like more general were about wound packing, tourniquets application and stuff. What are the other topics that you can also cover?
So as I said, we initially thought we needed to really focus in on the advanced pre-hospital trauma training, and specifically, again, for what was being seen in the Ukraine war. So in a lot of our wars during the War on Terror, we had some blast injuries, but a lot of gunshot wounds, so a very different injury pattern. And so one of the things we wanted to focus on here was there are so many blast-related injuries because of artillery or mines or missiles. So we really focused on things like needle and chest decompression because of the overpressure injuries that can occur in the thorax. surgical airways, obviously last definitive airway, but often seen when we have facial trauma as a possibility at least. And then blood far forward because of the amount of trauma that was happening and the inability for the system as it stands right now to really get enough blood forward. So at least starting to introduce the concept of whole blood in the field and the blood far forward. And then we, again, being informed by the Ukraine problem, or the issues that are being seen here, really started to emphasize the importance of tourniquet conversion. So there were so many tourniquets being put on, but what that led to after the first year of the war, the anecdotal data at least, was that there were a lot of amputations that were occurring, possibly preventable. And so one of the things that we committed to doing was, if we were going to teach tourniquet application, we had to, at all levels, teach reassessment, rapid reassessment, and then early conversion if possible. So we kind of span the gamut of the basics from tourniquet application and hypothermia control, wound packing, hemorrhage control, all the way up to the very advanced, finger thoracostomy, surgical airways, blood transfusions.
Cool. And having that in mind, like the structure that you just had the overview from you.
Yeah.
What is the structure? How your team structures the training? That is something that we are interested as a group who focuses also on education.
Yeah.
What are your opinion? And I know that for all that iterations of your trips, of your missions, of groups that you've trained, you probably came up with updated versions of how to structure your training in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Because I know that you have like a military style management, and everything should be like you have always the agenda written somewhere.
Yes.
And keeping track by somebody. So can you please tell about the structure, how your team organizes everything?
Sure. Well, I think the most important thing that we do is we're very committed to the idea of meeting people where they are. So while we may come in with a structure, if a group comes and they say, or we assess like they still need basic foundational knowledge, we will start at the basics and then we'll work from there. Because the other foundation that we work on is if you can't do the basics right, there's really no need to advance on to the harder things. So we really want people to have a good foundation of skills. That said, when we're dealing with our advanced providers, the people who have been in medicine for a while, we have been starting with a skills assessment, basically a trauma lane, if you will, to see how they assess a casualty and what interventions they perform in those life-saving minutes. And then from there, we'll structure the rest of our curriculum. We are making an assumption at this point that most of the advanced providers understand the hemorrhage control portion. And so we start with like airways, respiratory issues. So we continue to move through the March algorithm. It's just we go past to the massive hemorrhage part and then go to airway, respiration, whole blood, and IV access, those kinds of things. The model that we've been working with the most over the last trip is kind of an idealized 3-day model where we have the opportunity to do a little bit of lecture, but it's mostly to introduce concepts. And one of the things that we feel strongly about is as much hands-on practice as possible. And we found that that not only really engages students and keeps them active in the class, it also, at least from our understanding, is a little bit different than the kind of Ukrainian educational system, which is mostly kind of lecture-based and very little opportunity for practice. And so what we really want is for people to get as many reps as possible, as many attempts as possible, to at least get hands-on skills practice.
So how do you ensure that both practical and theoretical parts are established, are provided? How do you, like, what do you use to get them practical hands-on experience, and what are the tools for theory presentation?
Sure. So again, we do believe the importance of the theory, the understanding, that's front-loaded. So basically all of our curriculum blocks are maybe 20 to 30 minutes of lecture with a lot of demonstration, and then maybe an initial 45 minutes of hands-on practice. Now we're very lucky. We've got some very good, and you had a chance to see it, some like wearable trainers. So we have like crike trainers that you can actually put on a human body so it looks like you're doing it on somebody. We have wound packing trainers that you can actually make bleed. And then we kind of use the local economy. So if we're doing chest issues, we'll go get ribs from the supermarket and teach people how to actually do the skill on something that's pretty similar to the human body. Mm-hmm. And so that repetition of skill usually happens on day one. And then the next day we've been practicing IVs, and we use each other, and we let the students practice on each other because you have to actually do it on people. And then as we go through the course of the 3 days, that third day, if we have a fourth day, those tend to be open skills day. So the things that maybe you say, oh, I'd like more practice with this, people can come back in and get more chances.
And I know that this first response pre-hospital skills that you teach and tactical medicine parts in it, they on practice when the students that you teach will actually use those skills, it will involve a lot of stress.
Yes.
Do you incorporate that somehow in your training to prepare them for using this knowledge in stressful conditions?
Yeah, again, it depends highly on the kinds of people we're working with. So the initial, what we call the TCCC refresher lanes, are often done with no introduction at all. A group will walk in and we'll say you have 2 casualties over here, here are 2 bags, and it's before we even do introductions. And then they go do their thing, and then they come back and we're like, hello, nice to meet you, my name's Mike, I've got clothes back on. But we have done that everywhere from, you know, a very controlled, slower paced environment. When we did it in Sloviansk, we did it in a basement with no light. The team literally had to come down the stairs into the dark, didn't know what they were getting into, fully kit, and then they had to execute. So in that way we introduce an initial stress piece, and then we back it way off, because to learn skills effectively, we want them to learn them in a controlled environment first, learn good technique, and then be able to apply them. The other thing that we've added, again, based on the education of the Ukrainian experience, is the importance of what we call prolonged field care. So unlike our combat, where you might sit on a casualty for 45 minutes and then a helicopter's coming in yours, with the last unit we talked to, their average evacuation time was between 8 and 72 hours. So how do you take care of a patient for 6 hours or 12 hours? And one of the things we introduced, which you saw in our last training, we've done that again, we did it again last week, was the stress of that. So it's not the acute stress of, I need to do life-saving interventions, it's now the prolonged stress of, I've got to do this for 6 hours, I don't know when it's going to end, I don't know what all is going to happen in the scenario or to my real patient. And so we've introduced that level of stress as well. But it's a slower stress, so we can then go back and coach through it and revisit it over time.
What do you think is the most effective pieces of your training? I mean, the things that you do and you emphasize them, you ensure that they are met during the trainings, so that training has sense. Like, you know that without these pieces, there will be no sense doing this for these people.
I think the realism. So, you know, obviously learning from Ukrainian providers what's real for them, not just coming in with an American model and saying, well, this is the way tactical medicine is done, and then that's not realistic. So by learning from Ukrainian providers at all echelons of medicine, we can then make our training more realistic, and then we can build out scenarios and training models. So the crike necks, the wearable moulage that's more like what you see here, and then really make it scenario driven and skills oriented. So can they effectively move through these harder skills in a very realistic for them environment?
Mike, what are specific challenges that you've met during your trainings?
I think the biggest challenge that we face here is how dynamic the conflict is. So there have been times when we have arranged training, but the unit or group we're going to go train suddenly has to make a change based on movement or needing to go to a different location, or the threat is too high. We were up in the north. We were supposed to do some training in Sumi back in March, and the night we got there, they said, sorry, we have to cancel because of the drone threat. So there's the persistent threat of change. The other challenge that we have is merely it's the pace and tempo of the war. So as hard as this is to talk about, if we train a group of medics in July, there's so high attrition, there's no telling if those same medics will be available in March or the next year. And so the pace of the war makes all of the training and the consistency of training and the ensuring that we're maintaining skills so much more challenging across the board. And that's just for us, but I mean for the Ukrainians who are living it, it's so much harder.
What are the challenges or maybe difficulties that you faced regarding cultural differences, language barrier, and logistical problems and like supply chain, maybe something like that?
Well, I mean, you hit on the biggest one. For us, as a U.S. team, we need full support on the language side. Without our interpreters, we couldn't do anything. And so we're very grateful for the interpreters that we have. We think that they're fantastic. And obviously, without them, we couldn't do anything. So that's a big challenge. It's a huge lift that they're helping us provide. But you also talked about the supply chain. We've noticed quite a number of times when we are bringing medical supplies in because not always can the appropriate medical supplies be found in country for a number of reasons. And one of those goes back to the op tempo, the pace of this war is just such that it's hard to stay current with all of the material that you need, especially the medical stuff. I mean, so much medical equipment is being used and then reused. It's really hard to maintain good levels of equipment. So those are two of our big challenges. Culturally and logistically, we figure things out. And in that way, the Ukrainians that we've worked with, both within our team, but also the ones that we're going to go train, again, so hospitable, try and figure everything out for us. They make all of that stuff so much easier than if we were trying to navigate it on our own.
During the trainings themselves, when you see that you face the group, and you see that some groups are obviously more advanced, some are like beginners.
Yeah.
And how do you adapt your teaching based on what you see, like the skill set of the group?
Sure. Well, again, I mean, this is one of the challenges of Ukraine is because of the pace and the attrition, people are being pushed into medic roles who have no medical background or maybe don't have a whole lot of training opportunity. And so we do see a very wide difference between skill sets. The other thing we found is that again, unsurprisingly, the US nomenclature just doesn't fully work in Ukraine. So we have a very specific thing in mind when we say combat medic. But here, when we apply that same thing and say, hey, we would like all your combat medics, we get everything from the guy who drives the evac vehicle to the person who's actually in the back doing the skills and everything in between. And so what we try and do there is because we have 3 or 4 trainers, whichever the bigger group is, we will split our training. So we'll have maybe 2 of our trainers go with the advanced cohort and really refine skills and refine techniques. And we'll take our other people and work on the basics with the people who don't have as high a skill base. But then one of the nice things, one of the things that we try and do is take the people who are getting the basic skills and start to feed them toward the more advanced skills. So maybe we'll do an exercise where something will happen and the people who have the basic skills will do the initial interventions, and then they'll move those fake casualties, they'll move them to a different area where the people with the more advanced skills that they're working on can then do the things that they're doing. So we try and always funnel them in together in this idea that ultimately you will all be working together.
And as you said previously, that some of those people who are back in the car doing the procedures has like 10 years of medical experience.
Right.
Some of them are just, were a biologist or
yes,
a plastic surgeon or something
yes,
like that.
Yeah. We've seen many people who are now combat doctors who were dermatologists or podiatrists, but we're also seeing medics who 3 weeks before were mechanics.
Yeah.
Or, so again, the need for the skill set is so great that, it's
Absolutely.
whoever can do it.
Absolutely. And so you're teaching for quite a while so far, since the full-scale invasion. Did you start receiving any feedback from the students, like those who you trained before?
Yeah.
Do they reach to the group and
They
say,
do.
like, what do they? Can you?
Yeah, I mean, that is so meaningful because in a war of this size and this scope, we're a very small group. And of all the people involved in the war, it feels like we train so few and we want to do so much more. And sometimes it can be very discouraging because you're like, how much change can we have? And then you have to realize that, you can't, it's the individual. Like if I provide you life-saving knowledge and skills and then you use those to save somebody, you've changed somebody's life. And we've gotten text messages from medics where they've said, hey, I applied a tourniquet like you told me and I got my guy out after we were being shot at by a tank. And he didn't like the tourniquet at all, but I kept it on him and we got him out safely and he survived and I survived. Or we taught another medic in July of 2023 and we just saw him again in outside of Sloviansk. And he's still talking about, the IV skills that you taught me, I still use them. The medics that we trained are still doing those things. And in a war this size, you have to take those little individual successes and it keeps you going. So we do hear from them and it feels like, we're just so grateful they're still alive. And two, we're so grateful that we had the ability to teach them maybe one or two things that they're still using.
So in Ukraine, we have a specific name that we apply for something that we pass between each other, describing that it is awesome and you should try it too.
Ah, okay.
It's called Сарафанне радио. It's like a human's radio, like a people's radio.
Cool.
People pass a thought or an idea between each other, sharing the like describing it in positive way so another person could try.
Yeah.
Do you have that specific thing about your trainings? Like, do people share the announcement like, oh, there is a group?
Yes.
They can provide a training for you?
Yeah, almost everything that we do is word of mouth. We're very lucky that we've been doing it since the beginning, so we've made some good connections. And people have heard about the group and would like us to come and do training. Obviously, we know great people like you who've seen some of our training and advocate for it, because that's really important, because we are small and we don't have we don't have a constant presence here in Ukraine. So when we come, we're fully reliant on people to do that. Share the word, hey, we're coming, because like I said, we were not supposed to be in Kiev this week. We were supposed to be somewhere else training a different unit who we've trained before. But things happened and parts of the war happened and they were no longer available. So then it becomes, hey, I'm going to reach out to my friend Vlad or I'm going to reach out to this other person. And then because of people like you, we were able to set up other training and continue to do the work that we do.
Yeah, it's absolutely our pleasure as a group, as a class team, to help you navigate and provide your really valuable and well-structured trainings for people who might need it to build a more resilient Ukraine. That's
and ultimately for us, that's the most important. Is it for people like you who know the medicine, who know the available training? Does it have value for you? Because it doesn't matter if I come in and do something that I think is cool, but if it doesn't matter for the people in the fight, the Ukrainians who need it, then it's not worth anything. So when you tell me what we do is good, When you tell me that what we do is valuable because it's valuable to you, then that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. From what I've seen, the structure and the dedication that I see in your group and you as a team leader, how you manage the stuff, it's inspiring in the way that we try to also in our group to adopt some of the mechanisms that you use, some of the management techniques, because it's really effective.
Well,
it works, and it should be also spread among other groups that do the same stuff. Okay, and what are the main lessons that your team learned during your missions in Ukraine? Some specific things that you didn't think about before, but then you came to Ukraine, you did several trainings, and then now you can share that those specific points are new to us. We take it into account for the future.
Yep. I mean, the most obvious one is that the Ukraine war is not the American wars of the last 20 years. Everything about it is different. And so trying to take the American trauma casualty care model, and apply it here is not the correct thing to do. And so the most important thing we've done is we've learned. We've learned from the general Ukrainian experience. We've learned from living with the medics, what they tell us. We've learned how to refine, like I was saying earlier, how do you take what we know to be best practice medicine and make it most applicable to Ukraine? So the biggest takeaway that we have is that we have to make the medicine contextually appropriate, which is why we've added in things like prolonged field care, why we've added in the critical importance of tourniquet conversion, because these weren't things that we really saw in our conflicts. So we didn't really learn them, and when we first came, even our group, when we first came, we're like, U.S. trauma medicine is the gold standard, we're going to teach U.S. trauma medicine. And what we see a lot is people will come out and teach U.S. trauma medicine or teach the March algorithm. Hey, this is what you do and this is the only thing you do. And when in reality, we all know, and you know from your own practice, that medicine is contextual. And so you can't do the same thing with every patient, just like you can't treat the same patient. You need to understand the broader picture of how do I do good medicine for this person or in this context. And so that's been our biggest takeaway. And every time we've been here, we've refined and added, and then we add training tools that help us refine it a little bit more. So for tourniquet conversion, for example, in 2023, we were just teaching it. But if I teach tourniquet conversion to a class of 20 people have very different ideas of what I mean. So in March of 2024, we added the wearable wounds. So now people see what reperfusion looks like. They see what rebleed looks like. And so now you've taken all of those concepts and you've made them concrete. And so I think just the continual refinement of both what we teach and how we teach it to make it as contextually appropriate as possible is the biggest takeaway we've had from here.
I also see two polarizing thoughts in our medical society and military medicine regarding the U.S. Trainers and U.S. trainings. The first one is like they are polar, so they are like absolutely different, but they still are in the system. So one side thinks that like they pray for everything that is said in English. Like if American trainers come, they say something, it's like holy words and stuff. So what do you think about those types of people who share these beliefs? As a person who is actually American, who teaches medicine.
I think the important part is not then the audience. It's incumbent on us if we come in and we say, hey, we're American instructors, that we teach good medicine, and we teach it in a way that's applicable to Ukraine. One of the feedback points we hear is that for some people who've attended other training, it's people just kind of talk at us, they don't really learn about our war, and then it's not as applicable as it possibly could be. I think one of the interesting things with Ukraine is that if I came out, like I can be whatever I want out here. I can tell people, and because I am an American and because I have some paramedicine, Like I can be put on this pedestal. So it's really to my responsibility to use that platform in the best possible way for Ukraine. Not for me, not to teach, medicine that I don't fully understand, but to really do the best job that I can to benefit the people that I'm teaching. Because ultimately it's the people that I'm teaching who will have other people's lives in their hands. And it's a disservice to not do it any other way.
And so that was the one side of the spectrum. Another side of the spectrum, and it's challenging, probably might be challenging, but it's how it is. They say like, oh, Ukraine been in a war for more than 2 years, right? And our medics are way more skilled than, for example, American medics.
Yes.
So why do they come to us and teach us? So that's the opposite side of the spectrum. How do you reflect on that opinions?
They're also correct. One of the interesting things that has happened in the U.S. is during our war, we were so good at what we were doing that we had relatively few casualties. Since our wars have ended, a lot of our military medics don't really see very many casualties. So when we look at the people who have the most real-world experience in what we call peer-to-peer conflict, so big war conflict, they're here. They are Ukrainian medics, and we can learn, and that's why we have to learn so much. But the other truth is, while a lot of them may have extremely good real-world experience and can teach us a lot, we have to take that real-world experience and combine it with the why behind it. Like, yes, it worked, but can you tell me, like, why are these things working for you? Or let's talk about physiologically what's happening here that makes it work. But you're absolutely right. We have to respect the fact, and this is true also of people who've come from the outside and who've stayed here for this, who volunteered out here. A lot of people are getting an incredible amount of experience, volume of experience, and we have to honor and respect that. And we have to know that we can learn so much. And that's part of, so we talk about us coming out here to teach and to train. That's only part of what we do. The other part of what I do, and other people on our team does, is that when we go home, we share these lessons with our medics to get them better, to help them understand what a war like this looks like, because we don't know. And so we try and honor the work and the experience that all of these medics and medical providers have by learning. And then by taking those lessons home and being like, hey, this is what these guys are saying, and they know what's happening. They've been in this war for 2 years. They've been deployed to a forward position for 18 months, and they haven't seen their kids. And they're not coming home on 3-month rotations. Like, these guys are seeing a type of warfare with the artillery and with the drones, especially the drones, that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, and it's hopefully there won't be like a huge war in our world. Nearest future, but it's always better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in war, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
It's always good to be prepared. And the better you prepare, the less chances are that it will happen.
Right. Yeah.
So absolutely understand that point. And also one thing that I wanted to also ask your opinion on that. Sometimes this opinion on that, like we may have here more experience because we are in war for 2 years. This thought sometimes omit the fact that not all, like, there are people who are new to the system, who are newly conscripted.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate thing that they cannot be, not all of them can be easily, well trained.
Right.
Because it's always, we are against a huge country with a huge resources and a huge amount of people. So sometimes we need to, feel the need, right? They conscripted, they have some training, but that they send, and it's sometimes not enough. So it's always good to have a group who is dedicated to teaching. So it's like, it's like occasion. They come, and it's a specific time that you dedicate for learning. And the time that you may be good at at something, but you've never done, for example, whole blood transfusions.
Right, yeah.
And there is a specific thing that you will take from the training. All the rest will be like something that you've done 100 times.
Yeah.
But this specific thing that you
Yes.
take from the training
Yeah.
may be applicable in your future practice and may save lives. So
Yeah.
that's also...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen both, right? We've seen the conscripts who get very little training and maybe get like 1 or 2 days. So how do you teach them the most applicable thing? Because you can't teach them everything. So if maybe all you teach them is, hey, stop bleeding, keep people warm, that's most of what we do. But then you're right in that so many of these medics have done so many things, and how do you key in on maybe that one thing or maybe that one different technique, or you know, to say, hey, I want to hear about your experience, I want to know what you've been doing, and here, oh, you've told me about something where you had an issue with this, let me tell you about maybe this will work next time. Or so there's a full gamut of experience and knowledge, and it's incredibly challenging from a training perspective, but also incredibly rewarding. If you can reach both the brand new conscript and the medic who's been doing it for 15 years and try and find an ability to give them, all of them, something.
Yeah. What are the, just a list which will have several points in it, bullet points in it, what you took from the perspective of Ukrainian military medics and from first responders, what you take from them, which is kind of takeaways, lessons learned that you can share and you think that should be emphasized in a condition of modern war, that other systems, other medical systems should think about, should adopt, should try to have, you know, develop in their medical systems, also to be prepared for the modern war?
Oof, yeah, so I think the most important thing here is this is an enemy that's very capable, and all the things that we have been able to use in the US experience have almost been rendered obsolete without the ability to have air power, without the ability to have rapid evacuation, and honestly with the huge numbers of casualties that overwhelm systems. You know, whether they overwhelm the medic in the trench, or overwhelm the stabilization point, or overwhelm the hospital, just the sheer volume is something that we need to learn how to work with, because we as the US have been so spoiled in that we have maybe one casualty, or maybe at worst 10 or 20 casualties. I've talked to medics who've said, you know, we did an assault and within 5 minutes I had 100 casualties. And so understanding what that does, not just to your care plan, but to your resources. So it's a constant game of triage, and then you add on to that the prolonged field care piece, which we don't do very well, which is how do you sit on patients for the 8 to 72 hours that we talked about earlier. No helicopters coming to get your patient in 45 minutes. Right, so how do you take those large quantities of patients, triage them appropriately, allocate resources appropriately, and then allocate those resources appropriately over time.
Yeah, and so the most valuable lesson is that the war with the country, between countries which have similar capabilities.
Yeah.
They are different in a way that they require prolonged field care because you cannot take the person out of...
Right, yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay, so we are at the part of what are your future plans as a group and as your personal goals in these kind of missions? Maybe you have something in mind about future changes, whatever it might be. What are your plans for future?
So first and foremost, we remain committed to Ukraine. One of the things that we dedicated to very early on was this is the place we want to focus our efforts. Now, clearly there are other places in the world that things are happening, but we want to make sure that we remain committed to a problem that we believe is fundamentally one we want to be involved with, and that's this one here. We are working, the hard part for us has always been the funding aspect, to put a more consistent effort on the ground, because it's fine if you come and train for 1 month, but then if we can't come back for several months, how do we maintain our level of training? So we're working very hard to secure that, but we're also, like we were talking about, developing those partnerships with groups like Ethos and with Anyone Not Ready, which is based out of the US, to really continue to explore the importance of the prolonged field care piece and really add that into our curriculum as such a critical aspect of what's going on out here. So for us, it's continuing to refine. We're going to take the lessons that we learned on this trip, and we're going to go back and we're going to go revisit them, and then look for additional funding and hopefully make this more rotational so that we can come back and continue to provide the type of training we've been doing.
I really hope that you will be able to find additional funding, because the work that you do, the quality of it, it deserves investing and deserves funding.
Thank you.
Well, do you have something that we did not cover but you want it to be said throughout this interview?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be remiss if we didn't talk about the reality of what's happening here. And you know, I think from a Western optic, people see Ukraine as only war, and there have been a lot of things that have been really taken out of context, or it's really become a political issue back home. And what we lose sight of is what we're seeing around us, right? Like the goodness of Ukraine. And one of the things that we have absolutely loved on all of our trips is, you know, our team is very small, and we've had an opportunity to be in each other's homes and meet each other's families, and then we meet other good people, and we make really tight human connections here. And we love being here, and we love the people and how hospitable they've been to us, and how amazing every part of the culture is here. And if I was talking to an audience back home, that's one of the hardest things because people always ask, like, why do you want to keep going back? Like, Ukraine seems so terrible. And Ukraine is not terrible. It's the farthest thing from terrible. The war is terrible. The war is the worst thing I've ever seen. But Ukraine as a country and as a people is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And it's hard to tell an audience back home. Like, you can tell them, but it's not, it's hard to make that resonate. One of the most meaningful things on the flip side that we did was, I had a friend who came out on this last trip, Kyle, you met him. Yes. Kyle had never been to Ukraine before. And he and I have worked together back in the States, and I've gone to his trainings and I've talked about the truth of Ukraine. But then we went down to Maidan. And, you know, he had the chance to see the memorial and the scope of it. And that matters. Like, that changes people's perspective, you know, just how huge and horrible this war is. And while I love everything that we do here, I wish none of it was necessary.
Yeah, you mean that each and every small flag, Ukrainian flag that there is on Maidan, reminding of a fallen soldier and fallen...
Yeah, and it's not even, like, there's so many more that don't have flags.
Each city, in each
and
cemetery.
So, again, and we say this at every training, you know, we hope that nobody ever uses anything that we train them on, because it means that they're using it in an event where they're having to try and save somebody's life. And we're just so moved by Ukraine and by the people and our experiences here, and it's just been such a wonderful place for us, and yet I wish the context was different.
So, to conclude, maybe you have something to say to organizations, medics, organizations of hospitals, international organizations who will see that in the future. Something that you want to share, something that you may refer to them regarding your experience in Ukraine.
Oof. I think for the international community, this is a place that's worth investing in. For those of us who can teach good medicine or provide good medicine, Ukraine has amazing capability, but they need the help. I think investing good medicine, investing good anything really, whether that's air defense systems or medicine or anything that Ukraine needs to win this war, because it's not just for Ukraine, it's for all of us. It's take away the geography of it, it's the ideology. Do we sit back idly and allow this kind of thing to happen to good countries and good people, or do we take a stand? And I think for all of us in the international community, all of us who are watching this from afar, this is a place that's well worth our time. It's well worth our skill set. And if we have the ability to do it, we should be fully involved and invested in Ukraine in the fight here.
I want to express my huge appreciation to the work you do, to shake your hand, and to wish you a great success with your trainings, with your missions in the future.
Thank you.
I hope that less and less medics will actually need to apply the skills that you teach, but I wish that your mission and your goal, your efforts of teaching Ukrainian medics and first responders to be ready will be success and will actually make Ukrainian more and more resilient and ready to protect itself and the world from all the bad things that are moving to the societies that we see now. And just huge appreciation, admiration of your work.
Thank you.
I hope you will have success continuing it.
Thank you.
And for this interview, thank you for finding time, for sharing your perspective, and for this wonderful conversation that we had today.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so impressed with the work. I mean, we've seen TAC med teams, and we've seen first responders, and we've seen medics, and it's just the dedication, and especially the TAC med teams who do it voluntarily. It's just, and we've worked with the DSNS, and the fact that those guys get targeted. Oof. It's so much huge respect to everybody.